The Battle of Sluys, also known as the Battle of Sluys, occurred on June 24, 1340, between England and France during the early stages of the 100 Years' War. This naval battle took place in the roadstead of the port of Sluys, Écluse in French, situated in an inlet between Zeeland and West Flanders. Edward III of England led a fleet of 120 to 150 ships, while the French, commanded by the Breton knight Hugues Quieret, Admiral of France, and Nicolas Béhuchet, Constable of France, had around 230 ships. The battle was a significant event in the long conflict between England and France. Edward's fleet set sail from the River Orwell on June 22, and upon reaching the port of Sluys, they encountered a French blockade. The French ships were arranged in 3 lines, creating floating platforms for battle. The English fleet strategically maneuvered to take advantage of wind and tide, while the French experienced difficulties due to their ships becoming entangled with each other. As the French tried to reposition against the wind and tide, the English launched an attack during this disarray. The English managed to outmaneuver the French and engage them in separate clashes, capturing a majority of their ships. The French suffered significant casualties, with estimates ranging from 16,000 to 20,000 men. This victory granted the English naval supremacy in the English Channel. Nevertheless, their success had limited impact on halting French raids on English territories and ships. Although the battle gave the English fleet a tactical advantage, they were unable to fully capitalize on this supremacy. Their strategic gains were modest, and the French continued their activities, largely unaffected by the naval setback. Despite the naval victory, the English focused their efforts on besieging the French town of Tournai, which ultimately did not succeed in capturing the town. Since the Norman conquest of England in 1066, English monarchs held titles and lands in France, making them vassals of the French kings. Over time, French monarchs sought to limit English power by taking away their French territories. By 1337, only Gascony in southwestern France and Ponthieu in northern France remained under English control. The people of Gascony had their own customs and language and enjoyed trading their red wine with England. This trade brought revenue to the English king. The Gascons preferred their relationship with the distant English king, who left them alone, over being ruled by a French king who might interfere in their affairs. Tensions between Philip VI of France and Edward III of England eventually led to Philip's decision to reclaim Gascony in 1337, which marked the beginning of the 100 Years' War, a conflict that would last for over a century. At the onset of the war, the French held an advantage at sea. They utilized galleys, shallow draft vessels powered by rows of oars, for their naval operations in the English Channel. Galleys were agile and suitable for raiding and ship-to-ship combat. The French supplemented their fleet with galleys hired from Genoa and Monaco. This allowed them to disrupt English commercial shipping and conduct raids on the coasts of England. In contrast, the English did not possess a dedicated navy. King Edward III had only 3 warships. The English relied on commandeering cogs, which were merchant vessels owned by English traders. These cogs had a round hull and were propelled by a large sail set on a mast amidships. To convert them into warships, wooden castles were added at the bow and stern, and crow's nest platforms were built at the masthead. Cogs could carry a substantial number of fighters due to their high freeboard, making them formidable in close combat. However, the process of impressing ships into service caused friction between shipowners and the crown. The compensation for these requisitioned vessels was often inadequate and delayed, leading to shipowners being reluctant to contribute their ships for warfare. In March 1338, French galleys captured and destroyed the English town of Portsmouth. Later that year, in September, a fierce battle known as the Battle of Arnhem-Joden took place off Falkeren, resulting in the capture of 5 English ships carrying wool. This included 2 of Edward III's warships. In October, the port of Southampton was seized and set ablaze by the French. The following year, Hastings suffered a similar fate. In 1339, Genoese mercenaries serving the French grew discontented as their pay was not delivered. Blaming their French commanders, they sought an audience with the French king. However, They were imprisoned, leading to their mutiny and return to the Mediterranean. This uprising resulted in the overthrow of Genoa's ruling patricians. The new leadership avoided new contracts with the French due to their mistreatment. English agents bribed several ship captains who had initially agreed to serve the French. In January 1340, the English successfully raided the French port of Boulogne. Taking advantage of mist, they surprised the French fleet, destroying numerous ships and naval equipment. The French lost most of their galley fleet and were left with only a few ships. This setback reduced the threat to England's south coast and enabled the English to focus on offensive actions. In response, the French gathered around 200 ships, including galleys, warships, oared barges, and merchant vessels, forming the Great Army of the Sea. Commanded by Hugues Quieret and Nicolas Béhuchet, this fleet aimed to challenge the English. Meanwhile, Edward III focused on his main campaign in northeastern France, intending to reinforce his continental allies against French offensives. These allies included states of the Holy Roman Empire and the Flemish, who had risen against France. The English resources allocated to the war in Gascony were limited, as Edward III concentrated his main forces on the larger campaign in northeastern France. The success of this campaign was pivotal for Edward's continental allies, who were eager for the English army's reinforcement. Numerous accounts of the Battle of Sluys exist from the time of the battle, with many of them written shortly afterward. These accounts include letters written by Edward III himself and various eyewitness testimonies. However, it's important to note that most of these accounts are biased in favor of one side or another, either English, French, or Flemish. While these contemporary accounts offer valuable insights into the battle, they often lack detailed information. Historian Kelly de Vries has pointed out that some aspects of the battle are only supported by a collection of interesting anecdotes rather than comprehensive details. This suggests that reaching certain conclusions about the battle can be challenging due to the fragmented nature of the available information. One of the prominent chroniclers of the Hundred Years' War period is Jean Froissart. His chronicles provide information that may not be found in other surviving sources. Froissart's accounts of the Battle of Sluys are particularly valuable for gaining a more comprehensive understanding of the events. It's worth noting that there are 3 different versions, redactions, of Froissart's chronicles, and they differ in various details regarding the battle and their interpretations of its outcome. Edward III had originally planned to sail his army to Sluys, located in Flemish Zeeland, in mid-April. However, English merchant ships, anticipating payment issues, were reluctant to participate. Many shipowners were likely bribing officials to overlook their lack of participation. Departure was repeatedly delayed due to these challenges. On June 8, news reached the King's Council that the formidable French fleet, known as the Great Army of the Sea, had arrived at Sluys, blocking English communications with the continent. The French strength was bolstered by additional ships, bringing their total to 213. This cut off Edward's intended route and heightened the urgency of the situation. A tense council meeting occurred, with Archbishop of Canterbury John de Stratford arguing against setting sail due to the risks involved. Edward was angered by this stance and declared that those who were afraid could stay behind. Orders were issued to dismantle coastal defenses and ensure the fleet's prompt departure. Shipowners were directly addressed by the king himself to expedite preparations. A remarkable feat of coordination was achieved, with a substantial fleet assembled at the Orwell River by June 20. The exact number of ships in the fleet remains uncertain due to lost payroll records, but it's believed to be between 120 and 150 ships. This fleet carried about 1,300 men at arms and 1,000 longbowmen. Edward's lieutenants were the Earls of Northampton and Huntingdon. The English fleet set sail on June 22 and reached the vicinity of Sluys by the next afternoon. Edward's plan was to sail further up the Zwin to Bruges and land his forces to support allies. However, upon sighting the English fleet, the French organized their ships to block Edward's route. The French arranged their fleet in 3 lines, with ships chained and roped together to prevent enemy passage. Some large ships, including the captured English vessel Christopher, were stationed at the front. Barbavira, a skilled commander of the French galleys, advised the French commanders to set sail and attack the English while they were disembarking, using maneuverability to their advantage. However, Béhuchet, the overall commander, had limited naval knowledge and insisted on holding a defensive position to block the inlet. This decision was influenced by his skepticism of Barbavira's expertise. After receiving a report from Reginald Cobham about the state of the French fleet, Edward III entered the roadstead on June 24, with the intention of attacking the French. He aimed to gain the advantage of wind, tide, and sunlight for his attack. Traditionally, the battle is said to have commenced around 3 p.m. Due to nearly a day of being connected by chains and ropes, adverse weather conditions, and maneuvering, the French ships had been pushed eastward and tangled with each other. Attempts were made to separate them and move westward against the wind and tide, but coordination was challenging in the chaotic situation. In this vulnerable state, the French fleet made contact with the English. Edward's strategy involved sending his ships in groups of 3, with 2 ships carrying archers flanking 1 with men-at-arms. The archers would rain down a hail of arrows on French decks, followed by the men-at-arms boarding the vessel. English longbows, with their rapid firing rate and longer range compared to French crossbows, played a crucial role. The battle took on the characteristics of a land engagement at sea. Opposing ships were lashed together, and soldiers engaged in close combat while archers provided support. The French's tactic of chaining their ships together turned disastrous as it allowed the English to isolate and overwhelm individual ships or small groups. The English's greater number of fighters, especially skilled archers, became a significant advantage. As the battle progressed, the tide turned in favor of the English. Their Flemish allies joined the fray, attacking the French rear and further tipping the balance. Edward described the French's defense as noble, acknowledging their resilience. Late in the night, the French rear line attempted to break out, but the majority of their ships were captured, sunk, or burnt. Only 17 ships managed to escape, including the galleys. The English seized 166 French merchant ships, while the remaining 24 French ships met various fates. French casualties were devastating, with estimates ranging between 16,000 and 20,000 killed, many of them drowned. Both French commanders were captured and subjected to brutal punishments. Nicolas Béhuchet was hanged from his own ship's mast, while Hugues Quieret was beheaded in retaliation for their past actions. The English suffered minimal losses, with only a few knights and a larger number of other fighters killed. This victory was celebrated with grim humor as the English joked about the fish in Sluys harbor speaking French due to the feast of French bodies. The battle had catastrophic implications for the French, marking one of history's most significant naval defeats, unmatched until modern times. While the Battle of Sluys allowed Edward to successfully land his army, which then laid siege to Tournai, the campaign ultimately ended in failure. The French-controlled city of Tournai in Flanders was the target, but despite the tactical victory, the English were unable to secure a lasting conquest. In the wake of the battle, the French responded by bolstering their coastal defenses and mustering troops. The French king, Philip VI, even ordered the arrest of Pietro Barbavira, the commander of the galleys, for perceived desertion. Although the English gained temporary naval supremacy in the English Channel, the strategic impact of the victory was limited. Philip had substantial resources at his disposal and could quickly rebuild the French navy. Within a month, a new French squadron captured numerous English merchant ships and crews. The French navy continued to disrupt English maritime trade and support their allies, the Scots. The loss of mariners due to the battle severely affected maritime trade in regions like Normandy and Picardy. An almshouse was established to care for survivors who were too injured to continue working as seamen. Coastal communities in England initially celebrated the victory, believing it would bring relief from French raids. However, these hopes were dashed as later in the year, the French launched raids on English territories such as the Isle of Wight, Portland, Teignmouth, Plymouth, and the Channel Islands. Despite the battle, the conflict continued. In retaliation for French raids, the English raided Brest and captured ships, including those from Genoa. Interdiction of English communications with Gascony was achieved by French, Castilian, and Portuguese squadrons in 1341. To commemorate the battle, Edward III's gold noble coin depicted him seated in a ship. The coin bore the inscription IHC transiens per medium illorum ibat, which translates to Jesus passing through the midst of them went his way. This inscription, based on the Gospel of Luke, was invoked for protection in battle during that time. The Battle of Sluys, while a significant victory for the English in terms of naval combat had only limited impact on the broader course of the 100 Years' War.